I'm joined today by Rupert Darwall. He is author of The Age of Global Warming, A History, which is the first book to chart the history of climate change in terms of the ideas, politics, and diplomacy which went to form it and explain how it has panned out. Rupert, it's a pleasure to speak with you. You have an article in National Review which says that there is a sort of McCarthyism that has developed around climate change and climate change science. Let's start there. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, what I meant was actually I quoted from a letter by an eminent meteorologist, Leonard Bengtsson, who about a month ago joined an avowedly skeptical London-based think tank, the Global Warming Policy Foundation. And 3 weeks later, he resigned because of pressure from colleagues who said they wouldn't cooperate with him and were evidently quite upset about this. And he described their reaction to him as McCarthyite.
And what did you mean by that? In other words, by being, what are we saying broadly, I guess, about climate science, right? By being skeptical that there is climate change happening or that humans have a role that is a factor in climate change, there is a sort of very kind of like a litmus test from so-called establishment scientists, or what really are we saying?
David, I think litmus test puts it very well. And the problem with climate science, or the phenomenon of climate science, is that it's not just a body of knowledge for its own sake. For example, if we take evolution has very little impact on public policy. However, climate science is, if you like, the feedstock for a political program, which involves radical decarbonisation of emission cuts and so forth. And a lot of people believe that this isn't just about seeking the truth of what is happening to global temperatures. This is a mission to save the planet. And when you have a mission bound up with knowledge, inevitably there is a compromise, if you like, and some would say a corruption of the pure pursuit of knowledge, which might in some ways jeopardize or undermine the advocacy function of science in terms of the political program.
Certainly, and speaking conceptually, I couldn't disagree with anything you've said, that there are mechanisms by which the pursuit of what is ultimately the accurate knowledge or true facts can be corrupted by various influences. The problem I have is when I dug into the specifics of your article, which we'll post a link to on our YouTube channel for everybody to see, is that, for example, you write about the pause in global temperature increase in the last 15 years, that it's been unexpected, and that this has been something that so-called establishment science is not really willing to accept. I researched this specifically because I thought, what better than to look at some of the specific arguments being made by climate change skeptics. As it turns out, that assertion that temperature has stopped increasing over the last 15 or so years is based specifically on cherry-picking 1998, which happened to be the warmest year in the last century, and then simply saying that subsequent years have not been as warm. It is completely not based in the scientific process to say, let's pick an outlier, in this particular case 1998, and say, since subsequent years haven't been as warm, clearly establishment climate scientists are ignoring the reality that temperature is no longer increasing. I feel that it is a distortion to make that claim.
David, first of all, the most recent IPCC statements have acknowledged what they call a hiatus, and they call it 15 years long. The second point, which I think is more important in many ways, is not whether there has been a pause for 15 to 17 years. and there can be debates about that, although the IPCC itself is pretty clear on that. The far more important point is that computer model projections run hotter than the observations, and there is a growing divergence between what was expected from the climate models, from the outputs of the climate models, and of what actually happened, and that was that's what Bankston wrote. This submitted a paper.
That's true, but again, what you're ignoring there, Rupert, and I don't know what's in your mind, right? I don't want to accuse you of ignoring this deliberately or simply ignoring it because you aren't aware of it. The IPCC has already addressed this, and they've said that yes, it's true. The outlier of 1998 and some hot years during the 90s did create a slightly higher projection of temperature increase than what we have seen. Yeah. And it is merely the result of choosing some particularly hot years in the 90s, but it does not actually alter the overall projections that they make. And remember, that's what the IPCC does, projections, not predictions.
Yeah, I have to say, when you get into the theology of the difference between a projection and prediction, I kind of slightly get lost. I mean, I can understand that it's partly to do that they don't know how much forcing there will be, the quantum of greenhouse gases there might be in the atmosphere, because it depends on the economy and so forth.
Certainly, but without getting into that, I guess my point is, which would be the best for you to respond to, is that the claim you're making about the inaccuracy of the IPCC has already been very specifically addressed by scientists.
No, I don't think that is the case. When it may have been addressed by scientists, but coming back to the Bankson point, that he was alert, he raised the issue that there is a gap between the model outputs and observations. Now, we two can have an argument about that.
Sure.
That's, this is a very eminent meteorologist, and he is making the point, neither of us do. And what's interesting is the reaction to him making that point, which was extremely hostile.
Well, I think maybe this is a good point to segue into the broader question, right? Which is this question of broader consensus on this issue compared to so-called reputable climate scientists who are admittedly outliers being subjected to a so-called litmus test or sort of McCarthyism. I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say that they're in any way kind of being discriminated against, because could it not be, and I ask this honestly, not rhetorically or not implying anything, could it not be, Rupert, that because there is this 97% to 3% consensus on the issue of humans and climate change, that it would be simply very difficult for scientists who are part of that 97% to work with someone who's in the 3%, because what they believe seems to go against the overwhelming majority of scientific evidence? Could it be that and not any McCarthyistic litmus test?
Well, I have to say, in a way, kind of what you've described is a litmus test. I mean, you can delete McCarthyite, but Rupert, it's a litmus test in the same sense that if you're going to be an anesthesiologist working in a surgery room, if your views on anesthesiology are that you don't really need the equipment because God will prevent the patient from feeling pain, yeah, that's a litmus test that if that's what you believe, you can't be in the surgery room, right? I mean, just because we can call something a litmus test doesn't mean that it's bad. Yeah, but David, there's a marked difference that in the case of Bankson, he's a 79-year-old scientist who has been eminent in his field, and there's been no question about his credentials or his seriousness as a scientist.
That's perfectly fair, but what about the countless others who are just as eminent, but you are discrediting because they have a different view?
No, the issue with Bankson was not that he raised this question of the divergence between model outputs and observations. What people objected very strongly to what his conduct was him joining an advisory board of a skeptical think tank. So this is not about whether his credentials as a scientist, his capabilities as a scientist. This was to do with who he chose to associate with.
All right, we will have to leave it there for today. We've been speaking with Rupert Darwall, author of The Age of Global Warming, A History. Really great to have you on, even if we don't agree on much of this.
Disagreement is entirely legitimate, David.